Hi, peace lovers, and welcome back. I'm Avis Kalfsbeck, and this is the Pieces Here podcast. We are currently in a fiction series here on the podcast titled Experiment Zero of the Peace Experiments. This is a 13-episode series following the reports of Kitty O'Compost, a small-town journalist with a sharp wit and a truth-telling goat named Marzipan. In this story, Kitty untangles the mystery of a global peace protocol through the lens of a local pothole, proving that the big questions of the world are usually hidden in the small things we walk over every day. It's a journey about the commons, the power of young people, and the quiet maintenance of peace. If you found us in the middle of this series, feel free to pop back to episode 184 to start the story from the beginning. In this chapter, Kitty moves from polished talking points to live inquiry as she listens closely to the arguments used to delay peace and discovers where fear replaces evidence. Here is Chapter 5, Arguments Against Peace, Interview Day. By mid-morning, the sky over Midway had turned the color of recycled printer paper. It was appropriate since today's task involved sifting through the arguments recycled by every bureaucracy that had ever feared peace. I adjusted my senses of the self before leaving the house. Kitty O'Compost, equipped as follows: black work pants, clean enough to pass for formal and flexible enough to chase goats, a thin blue button-down layered under my bond jacket, a messenger bag containing a camera, a notebook, the protocol packet, and 3 pens all plotting mutiny, a thermos of tea hot enough to warn truth twisters, and Marzipan already circling my boots as if preparing to cross-examine someone. Inventory complete, I set my laptop on the kitchen table, propping it up with a thick book on soil pH levels to get the camera angle right. Marzipan stood just behind my chair, her ears twitching. I clicked the link for my first appointment, the representative from Parallax Stack, Inc. The screen flickered to life, revealing a sterile, vacuum-sealed world that looked like a stand-in for a real working life. Behind the man on the screen was a wall-mounted display cycling through stock photos of smiling professionals who had never heard of Midway. The anti-commons had sent one of their polished mouthpieces, Mr. Halden Files. He wore a gray suit and a tie pattern with tiny shields, sitting in an office so white it made my kitchen feel like a forest. "Mr. Compost," he said, his voice compressed by the digital interface. "Pleasure. We appreciate your engagement with civic messaging." At the sound of the tinny voice, Marzipan leaned in, her wet nose appearing at the very edge of my camera frame. She let out a sudden, resonant snort that echoed through my speakers. On the screen, Files made a visible jump, his shoulders hitting the back of his ergonomic chair. "Is that a livestock animal?" he asked, squinting at his monitor. "She has robust opinions on metadata," I explained, nudging her back with my elbow. He cleared his throat and adjusted his camera. "Yes, well, let's begin." I clicked the record button on my desk. "Mr. Files, I understand your firm consults on regional infrastructure readiness. I'd like to discuss the disarmament protocol." His smile tightened into a pixelated line. "Of course, peace is a wonderful aspiration." It was a practice line chosen by a committee. "Yet the protocol hasn't been activated," I said, "despite the AI being ready." He clasped his hands, the motion blurred by a sight lag in the connection. "Yes, well, peace initiatives carry inherent risks." "Such as?" He leaned toward his computer camera lens, his face growing uncomfortably large on my screen. "First," he said, "economic destabilization. The defense sector is a major employer. Rapid disarmament could cause regional collapse." Fear argument number 1. Peace will ruin local economies. I wrote it down in my physical notebook, the scratch of the pen sounding loud in the quiet kitchen. "Second," he said, "innovation." Historically, competition drives breakthroughs. Without a readiness framework, research might stagnate. Fear argument number 2, war is necessary for scientific advancement. Marzipan, sensing the tension, let out a long, low bleat that vibrated through the table. On the screen, Files flinched again, glancing nervously at the corner of his monitor as if she might leap through the screen. Is she hostile? Only to contradictions, I said. Please continue. He straightened his tie. Finally, there is identity. Nations rely on strength projection to ensure stability. Abruptly removing that could make us appear weak. Fear argument number 3. Peace is weakness, and weakness is expensive. And the commons, I asked? Your engineer mentioned it. Files stiffened. Irrelevant. Outdated model. Not viable in modern governance. Because? He hesitated, the digital grain of his image smoothing over as he paused. Shared resources reduce control, and without control, alignment becomes unpredictable. Translation: commons equals a threat to those who profit from exclusion. Marzipan bumped the back of my chair, causing my laptop screen to wobble sharply. On the other end, Files recoiled as if the earthquake were happening in his own office. Well, he said, reaching for his mouse, I think that covers our talking points. One last question, I said before he could disconnect. Is delaying a ready system truly safer than dismantling weapons designed to harm? He forced a corporate half-smile. We must prioritize comfort. Comfort again. The anti-commons anthem. He gave a jerky nod and asked me not to quote him directly. I assured him I'd quote the ideas as they tend to repeat themselves. I clicked the End Meeting button, effectively vanishing Files in the sterile world of parallax stack ink into a single black dot. Talking to him was like trying to nail fog to a wall. I headed toward the edge of town on foot. Marzipan trotted beside me, her hooves click in a steady, honest rhythm against the pavement that helped shake off the digital residue of the meeting. She stopped once to investigate a cluster of persistent dandelions pushing through a crack in the sidewalk, a tiny, stubborn rebellion of the commons that Files would have tried to categorize and postpone. I pulled her along toward a place where the jargon had to survive the scrutiny of teenagers who hadn't yet learned to be polite to bureaucrats. Osprey Point High School sat on the hill. I navigated to the science wing, room 213, the domain of Ms. Finch. The air here felt generous. The walls were covered in hand-drawn diagrams of localized energy grids. This was the solar punk heart of the school. Laptops hummed alongside bubbling hydroponic towers. Garrett was there, tucked into a corner station with the same focused intensity I'd seen at the council meeting. Being a freshman didn't seem to stop her from commanding the most complex terrarium in the room. Miss Finch greeted me with warm eyes and the grounded presence of someone who believed kids were capable of more than they knew. Kitty, she said, offering a clean spot at a lab table. Garrett said you might have questions. Garrett sat nearby with her notebook open, pretending not to listen while listening very hard. I took a seat. Marzipan promptly wedged herself under the table, her nose pointed toward a stack of vocabulary cards. A few students at the neighboring lab station paused their titration experiment, watching Marzipan with the focused, narrow-eyed interest that they clearly hoped looked like scientific observation rather than delight. One boy adjusted his glasses and offered a slow, cool nod to the goat. Marzipan acknowledged him with a twitch of her ear, and the room's collective tension dropped by half a degree. Mr. Files told me peace initiatives are risky, I began. Miss Finch smiled. Of course he did. Adults tend to elevate fear into policy. He claims disarmament threatens jobs, innovation, and national identity. All untested hypotheses, she said gently, fear dressed as certainty. If a scientist made those claims, they would have to test them. They would formulate a hypothesis, create experiments, and gather data. But adults rarely test their fears. They just legislate them. I felt a small spark light in my chest. So you believe peace is testable? She nodded. Everything humans do is testable. She gestured toward the students around the room. Right now, we are designing prototypes, little micro experiments. If we want to know whether cooperation weakens performance, we test it. If we want to know whether shared resources create chaos or harmony, we observe it. Garrett slid her notebook toward me. The page was titled, Hypothesis. Peace does not decrease human capability. Below it was experiment number 1, 2 finish lines. It was a diagram of a racetrack with circular arrows and 2 labeled endpoints, win and also win. It's brilliant, I said. It's simple, Miss Finch corrected. Simplicity terrifies the anti-commons. It leaves no place to hide. I wrote in my notebook, adults invent barriers, kids design experiments. And the disarmament protocol, I asked, is postponement reasonable? Miss Finch's expression softened. No, postponement is a form of fear. If the AI is ready, the question isn't can we dismantle weapons, it is why aren't we willing to? Marzipan scratched once beneath the table in approval. Garrett looked up finally, her eyes fierce. If they say peace will break everything, shouldn't they have to prove it? There it was, the thesis, spoken by a freshman with impeccable logic and no patience for inherited fear. I closed my notebook and thanked them. Miss Finch invited me back any time, noting that inquiry requires witnesses. On the walk home, the air had cooled and the recycled printer paper sky was beginning to bruise with evening purple. I let the 2 conversations braid themselves in my mind. Files offered fear, greed, and misdirection. Finch offered logic, inquiry, and hypothesis. And Garrett offered a certainty that was already carving a new path. I looked down at the scribbled notes from my morning call. Parallax Stack Inc. The initials PSI sat at the top of the page, circled in a moment of boredom, while files had been droning on about innovation stagnation. My mind drifted back to a high school physics lesson I had almost forgotten, something about pressure, pounds per square inch. It was a strange name for a company supposedly dedicated to strategic readiness. It made me wonder if they were measuring the strength of peace or just the force of the explosion they were so afraid to prevent. Marzipan nudged my hand, sensing my focus shifting. You're right, I told her, tucking the notebook away. They are afraid of peace because peace demands proof, and proof requires releasing the pressure. Above us, the facility hummed, a sound that now seemed unmistakably anxious. I opened my notebook one last time before reaching my porch and wrote one final line. If fear is their argument, experiment is ours. You've been listening to Experiment 0 of the Peace Experiments. I hope you'll join us for the next episode. My books and peace projects can be found at aviskaufspec.com, including the Peter the Water Dog Saves the Planet Best Friend Eco-Fiction series. For those who want to dive deeper into the peace themes we covered in 2025, I've created a 2025 recap ebook. It includes everything from Kitty Ocampo's satire debut to the deep history of the Great Disarmament. It's complimentary and available now at aviskaufspec.com/2025. Thank you again. Listen for the peace.